Here on Treaty 7 territory, nestled in the Rocky Mountains with the mighty Bow River at an altitude of 1,309 meters. Born from coal dust in 1884 and ever-changing, this is Canmore, and we are Canmorites, and this is the Canmorite podcast. Let's go. Hey there, it's me, Jeff Ma from the Canmorite podcast. We're coming into like the silly season, and I've got a great friend of mine and the guest. He's coming from just like up the valley, affectionately known as Canmore West, but some of you guys know it as Banff. And who we got here? We have
Grant Canning, councillor for the town of Banff. And I prefer to think of Canmore as the suburb of Banff. So, this works out really well.
Let's good thing Joanna Cameron's not on this call because she would lose it. So anyway, Grant, like I'm a first-term counselor. You've been a counselor like multiple times in Banff, and I think one of the things I really appreciate is we sometimes are on similar committees, and then you've always given me some really like great advice and insight on how to look at being a counselor, how to solve problems, etc. And so I've always appreciated mentorship. But for yourself, how many terms have you been a counselor in Banff now?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm just finishing up my fourth term,
Whoa.
and so I've announced that I'm going to try to run for number 5. So hopefully I'll be fortunate enough to do one more.
Right on, because I think you're also the first counselor to announce in Banff. Is that correct?
I think as it turned out, I was. Yeah, I was the first one to officially file my nomination paperwork about 2 weeks ago now. Subsequent to that, I think everyone else on council has actually now filed. I think so. Right. All 7 of us are actually running again. But
all 7
yes, I was actually the first.
Wow.
All 7. Yeah, absolutely.
And then are there any other additional people at this point right now?
Yeah, there's actually quite a few. I think we have 13 total at this point. With nomination day coming tomorrow, there obviously could be at least a couple more last minute ones. Historically that has happened. So we'll just kind of wait and see what happens tomorrow. But yeah, at this point, I think there's 13.
Yeah, and I think Canmore, last time I checked, we got 12. So definitely in Banff and Canmore, we have contests for the counselor roles. So Grant, what are some of the things that you're seriously motivated to push forward if you're to get elected again? Because 4 terms on council, that's definitely nothing to sneeze at. You probably have a certain level of thinking that you'd want to bring forth to the community. Like, well, what's driving you for one more term here?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. It was a really interesting term for us last time, as I'm sure it was for you as well. Obviously, it started with COVID. That was a really big part of us, a part of this term and what we had to deal with as a community. We've had some very big issues, things like obviously the pedestrian zone referendum that we had to go through. We've done a lot of really good things around housing, and that's something else that if you're interested in chatting about, I'd love to chat with you about that.
Sure.
But I think for me personally, in the last year or two in particular, I've really focused on this idea of visitor use management or human use management within Banff and the Bow Valley. And it's something that I kind of fell into in a way with just some conversations with other communities and people that I know in other communities. And as I've dove into it more and more, I've realized it's something we really need to be doing in this valley. And it's something that I've managed so far to, get really good support with my council on. And so my existing council has been very keen to move forward with this. And so one of the really important things for me moving into the next election, or this election into the next term, hopefully, is to really see these things through. I really want to be a part of those discussions to implement the things that we've put forward so far.
Okay. And so when you're talking about visitor use management, I'm assuming that's just kind of a response to how intense visitation has gotten in Banff these last couple of years. Is that what you're like discussing in terms of management side?
Yeah, it's really being very proactive about what's happening as far as visitation.
Right.
The entire Bow Valley has seen a real crush of increasing numbers, increasing visitation within Banff National Park, and certainly within the Bow Valley.
Yeah, because whenever people go to you, they see us as well too.
Absolutely, and we live. I call it a tourism ecosystem.
Hmm.
We obviously have wildfire ecosystems, we have wildlife ecosystems, but we also have a visitor or a tourism ecosystem.
Absolutely.
And what's really interesting about that to me is, to your point, visitors do not distinguish between Banff, Canmore, Banff National Park, Lake Louise, even as far as Kananaskis, right? Like they just don't. They come to this area because they want to see all of it.
Yep.
And so, yes, we obviously have a Banff National Park boundary,
Hmm.
but it's in some ways, from a visitor perspective, it's kind of arbitrary because how many people stay in Canmore in large part because they want to come into Banff National Park. So it's really important that we look at these things much more holistically than perhaps we have done in the past.
Yeah, I definitely think that would be a super interesting piece to like dive into further because for sure, like I've noticed this last little while, like with every progressive year after COVID, things have gotten like busier and busier. And there's all these ripple decisions that even come down from Banff. Like, I've heard at times, they're going to propose um certain like visitation times for Minnewanka. Or, I'll hear situations like, hey, if you want to go to Lake Louise, you got to take a shuttle. And all that spillover comes back. Like we hear it as well. And it's interesting because when the visitor comes, like you said, they're not really thinking, this spot, this spot, this spot. Is it a regional experience for them? And they're here to enjoy as much of it as they can, whether it's in the national park or not. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and I use this metaphor of a balloon
Okay.
in that if Parks Canada implements some sort of restriction, whether it be a timed entry system, a reservation system, those types of things,
Hmm.
which to be very clear, I'm not opposed to that idea. I think it may make a lot of sense in under different circumstances and what have you.
Hmm.
But if Parks Canada were to implement something like that, uh, it doesn't stop visitors from coming to Banff National Park or to the Bow Valley.
Hmm.
What it does, it just pushes them somewhere else,
For sure.
right? So if, using the balloon metaphor, if Lake Minnewanka is closed down one day and someone doesn't have a reservation, they're not just going to go home. They're going to try to come to the town of Banff for the 1A, or maybe they're going to go to Canmore, maybe even Kananaskis,
Hmm.
those types of things. And so the more you put these pinch points in,
Hmm.
it just spreads them somewhere else. Like these
Sure.
visitors just go somewhere else. And so this is why it's so important to me that we look at this holistically from the entire region. And you mentioned, Canmore and the effect of Canmore because, with your long range plans and different things that are happening in Canmore, you will see more homes, you will see more people moving to Canmore,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
And
That's been a
we
given for.
Exactly. I've heard, some reports, or I've read some reports that you're talking substantial growth in the next 10 to 15 years. And not only that, but substantial growth on overnight accommodation. So
Yeah.
it's not just people living there, there's going to be a lot more hotel rooms and overnight accommodations. So if that call comes to pass in the next 10 years or so, those residents, those visitors are going to want to come into Banff National Park or
Yep.
to Kananaskis, right?
100%.
They're going to go there. And so as a result, even if it's just to find out what the plans are, so other communities and other levels of government can discuss it, so we're all on the same page. And that to me is really, really important.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because, like I think one of the things that we on council always sometimes we look at you guys in Banff and oh wow, those guys, like they got their challenges, but they have a need to reside. Right. And whereas we do not have that level. And so, we have a lot of like interesting housing pressures where, it's quite a lot more accessible for second homeowners, other people to come in, etc. And they all form a fabric of the community. And so let's kind of dive into the bit of the housing piece. How is housing in Banff right now? You talked a little bit about you guys are proud of some of the work you've done. What's the vector? Where do you guys think you got to go?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a question that has been there for a very long time, and we will continue to have this issue. Hopefully in the next 5, 10 years, we're going to make a pretty significant improvement to it. But you
Mhm.
touched on one of the most important parts of it, and that is the need to reside.
Yep.
And for people who live in Banff, have to work in Banff, right? And so we are very fortunate to have that. I think it's one of the greatest pieces of legislation as it relates to the town of Banff and Banff National Park. And
Mhm.
so, we don't have those second home pressures that, other
Yeah.
communities do. Certainly Canmore does, but, you look at some of the communities in the US, Vail, Aspen, places like that. And so that has been very fortunate to us. The other part of this that tends to get missed sometimes in this equation is our commercial development cap.
Okay.
Because our commercial development is basically at build out now, the only real growth we're going to have from a commercial perspective is changes of use,
Right.
or even intensification. So we're not going to get any more new hotels. We're
No.
at that point, it's just not. So where any sort of population growth is going to come is tends to be from intensification. If, like, for example, a retail store changes to a restaurant, those
Mhm.
types of things.
Yep.
So the point being is between those two things, our population is not going to grow substantially.
Yeah.
We are going to be at a pretty flat, trajectory in the next few years.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things too is there are people that, like support the Banff economy. And like you said, it's really tough to get housing there. And, there are folks for sure, like that live in Canmore and they make the commute down. I know that's something that, we work as hard as we can on like the housing piece and we're just trying to figure all those things out. Like something I think that would be really helpful too is like if there's some, broader Bow Valley conversations in terms of staff housing, like
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. And I would love over time, like for the MD of the Bighorn to come into that conversation more deeply. But, obviously they're working on their own framework and their own times. But yeah, the housing piece, that's probably the thing I'm most passionate about on our
Yeah.
platform. And yeah, like I do see that Palliser area has like huge potential, but for us, one of those challenges is just energizing that with money.
Yeah.
How to get the funds to do. Like, how do you guys in Banff, get the funds to drive your projects forward?
Well, it's our we are we're quite unique in that because we also have a set footprint, our 4 square kilometers.
Yeah.
We by necessity have to do density. Like,
Yeah.
we don't really have a choice, and other communities don't have those types of pressures, and
Mhm.
at least as it relates to this desire for density like we do. And so even something as simple as, single family residential homes are all discretionary uses now. They're not permitted. Like, you have to get permission
Right.
if you're
Hmm.
going to build a single family home.
Hmm.
But perhaps more importantly, we had a very difficult conversation, I think, with the community around parking and how parking fits into this equation. And
Hmm.
that is certainly something that we continue to grapple with. But I'm really proud of our council because we really made a conscious decision to say housing and homes
Hmm.
is more important than a place to park your vehicle.
Yep, for sure.
And that is something that we realized it's going to be really difficult to do both. And I know a lot of people think you can, but when we change that bylaw,
Hmm.
about removing parking requirements, that doesn't mean parking won't get built. It just means it leaves it up to the developer to decide.
Hmm.
But for our community in particular, when we made that decision, it has spurred new developments to levels we've honestly never seen before. Like,
Hmm.
we have in our town right now 430 new homes in the pipeline,
Hmm.
as far as apartments, duplexes, fourplexes,
Are these
etc.
developer led or some of these like through Banff housing
The
or
vast majority is developer led.
okay.
And it's a lot of people who are, because of, like, for example, we have people who are now developing accessory dwellings in their basements or over their garages and things like that. And a lot of them couldn't do it before because their lots were not conducive to adding extra parking.
Right. Gotcha.
They
Gotcha.
couldn't, they physically couldn't do it based upon the regulations. So
Mhm.
once we removed that, we've had a lot of proposals coming forward.
So you're talking about
And
reducing like or removing parking minimums? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, completely. There are no parking minimums at all. They are now gone. So if you want to build, say a fourplex or a sixplex on a single family lot or on an individual lot, you don't have to have a parking. You don't have to have parking on that lot,
Uh-huh.
right? And the reason being is parking is very, very expensive,
Yep.
especially if you go underground,
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
right? And so that was always a real drawback for developers.
Hmm.
And so, and at the end of the day, I'm very proud to say, as someone who believes very strongly in the real importance of having a home, I will always choose building apartments over where people park their cars.
Yep, for sure.
And I think that's just really something that's key for us here.
Yeah, and I think that's probably gonna be something that's gonna move forward, like in Canmore here as well too. Like we have stuff where we have developments coming into like the downtown core, et cetera, and really like this taking like a harder look on parking minimums because the rubber's gonna hit the road eventually. It's like we have finite land, like even in like the Palliser area, like, we have like a lot of land, like but once we start building it out, it's like at the end of the day, it's like what's more important, like slots for cars or like homes for families? And we gotta like make like the right choice.
Well, and I go back to a few years ago. I was doing some real estate work, particularly in appraisals and things like that. And so I had this opportunity to see a lot of homes in Banff, and it was fascinating, and not in a good way to me, about many how many homes and apartments I went into, and I saw some of the conditions people were living in.
Oh
Like
yeah.
it was really disappointing to me, and it made me, I'm kind of angry, to be honest, because the amount of people I literally saw sleeping in closets, or there was 8 people to a bedroom,
Yeah.
because that's just the nature of it. And to me, that's just not acceptable. It
No,
just isn't.
yeah, yeah. Like anecdotally, I remember talking with our fire chief. They were having these issues too, where they're going around, they're like checking in on homes, and same thing. There was like a home that would have like technically should have been like a lot less people, but there was having like 8, 10 people in the house, but it's actually double that because they work
Yeah.
shift. And so like you share a bed with someone else, and I don't know if that's the kind of society that like we
No.
need to hold as a standard of what we want to move forward. We gotta get better than that.
N-
So
No, you're absolutely right. We do. And there was a lot of press, not good press, around the very large house in Banff that had 44 people living in it,
I heard about that
right?
house. Yeah.
Right. And this is the kind of thing we're talking about. So for people, to me, that it's so important to recognize that as a challenge we have as a community, and the responsibility we have as
Mhm.
a community to address it.
Yeah.
And history has shown that we were not getting the developments that we were hoping for through other means. It just wasn't happening.
Mhm.
And so when we started looking at things like parking requirements and stuff like that, it was a bit of a leap, to be honest. But you
Yeah,
know
for
what? I'm
sure.
really proud of what we've accomplished, because it's now coming it's now coming true that what we thought was going to happen is actually happening. And it has been this tremendous catalyst, because, to put it into perspective, 430 units, and there's probably another 200 that
Mhm.
just haven't been applied for yet. But our entire housing stock is about 4,000.
Right.
So we've
10%.
done a 10 to 15% increase, just because, predominantly because of that one change. And
Mhm.
I think that's a tremendous success story.
Yeah, so like I know that like in the city of Calgary, like other places, they've reduced parking minimums or taken to zero. Like for you guys, like how's that been like rubber on the ground? And, like when that hits the road, how's it been like in these neighborhoods where we're taking away the parking minimums? A lot of times people that are cynical will be like, well, it's not going to function anymore. There's going to be cars everywhere, or why am I going to park? How does that like like played out in like real life? Has it changed people's habits? Has it changed their ownership levels, like how they use vehicles? I'm curious to that point because I feel that might be something that is going to be happening more and more, and not everybody is like totally like understanding of like what the outcomes could be.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of concern certainly around it, and even now that concern is still there.
Mhm.
And a couple things. First of all, the concerns with because in fairness, this wasn't new. We changed some of our parking regulations a number of years ago. So some of the new developments from the original bylaw 380, which
Mhm.
changed or lessened the requirements, and subsequent to that, we've taken them out completely. But the first wave of the changes, excuse me, um, it hasn't had the negative impact that a lot of people thought it would. And in
Okay.
fairness, a lot of those housing developments that had much reduced parking, there isn't really a significant difference, to be honest, because that leads into the second part of this,
Mhm.
and that is a lot of our residents don't have vehicles. I'm sure some do. Absolutely. I have a car. Most people have cars, for sure. But there's also a lot of residents who don't, or they do like car share programs, like, amongst friends. A couple people,
Right.
get together, pool their money, they buy a car together. And
Mhm.
so we have a community that is not as car centric as most. And
Mhm.
secondly, we have a very walkable community. right?
Yeah.
We are 4 square kilometers.
Mhm.
I'm very fortunate. I live, half a block off Banff Avenue and a block from downtown. I can go a week or two without ever getting behind the wheel of my vehicle. And even then, it's probably because I have to go run an errand outside of town somewhere.
Right.
So we're very much a pedestrian cycling type of town.
Mhm.
And so because of that,
Mhm.
it's just not as important to have a vehicle for your day-to-day commute. I think 50% of our staff or 50% of our residents or workforce do not drive to work,
Mhm.
right? Like they walk or they bike. And so some of our situation is very conducive to not being car centric, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, like I can totally understand that. And I also feel too like like we used to be a two-car family and and that's like one of those tactics of, oh, like how are you gonna have a car? You have two kids, but and for the longest time we just realized, we're actually kind of like a 1.25 car family. We have this like other car that literally sits there and it barely gets driven, only on the odd occasions. And I remember through the pandemic, there just came a point where like, why are we paying for this? And we like let it go and we got creative with like scheduling and then
Yeah.
I think just then we got like an e-bike and you could carry a kid on the e-bike and there's lots of ways to do it where like I think traditionally having like a ton of cars for everybody um isn't that great? And I love to hear the fact that people are doing some grassroots car sharing in Banff, where they're deciding to share a vehicle. I think that's amazing. If we can start bringing stuff like that where people own what it is that you really need instead of having all that stuff. Because I get it, you want to go out to the mountains, you want to go hike, you want to do this, you want to do that, and that does oftentimes preclude, needing a vehicle. Um, but there's got to be ways we can do it better, for sure. And
Well, and the other thing that this council recently approved is to do a car share pilot program with a private
yeah.
company,
Mhm.
right? And we're super excited about that too. And we'll hopefully it's successful. And I think as you create other opportunities, and this speaks nothing to the Rome transit network, right?
Yeah, which is amazing.
And how successful that's been. But if you create these other opportunities, um, people will look at that and they will consider their own circumstances. And another argument is, and I'm sure you've come across a lot of this research,
Mhm.
if you build a lot more parking, it just fills up with cars.
Oh yeah, I
Like
think
all of a sudden, okay, I got a place to park it. I'm going to go buy one, right? And
yeah.
so, to
Mhm.
your point, you might have a family that is a 1.2 car family,
Mhm.
but all of a sudden, if there's all this extra parking, well, before you know it, you might be a
Why
2 or
shouldn't we
even a
be?
three
Yeah,
car family,
exactly.
right? And this
Yeah.
is just how people react to these things. It's the same scenario of in large cities when you add extra lanes on freeways.
Yeah.
It doesn't alleviate it; it just encourages more people to drive,
Yeah.
and
So.
and that is what we've seen time and time again in different things. And I think uh, people will look at these situations and make decisions what's best for them. But again, it goes back to what I said. I think housing and getting people off couches and out of closets is much more important than
Yeah.
trying to figure out where you're going to park your second car.
Yeah, totally. Um, is there anything else that you're hopeful for this next council to like take on? Like, is there any other things you're like, okay, because we talked some of the big stuff, right? We talked about housing, we talked about visitor management. Is there anything else like in your sort of view, Grant, you're like, man, if we could get a handle or we could get some resolution on that these next 4 years in Banff, it would just be an amazing thing.
Well, I do want to just go back to the human use side of it because one thing, this is to your point, it is a big topic, but I think this is a really important topic for the town of Banff, and that is for far too long, we've looked at these things as tactics and kind of one-offs.
Mhm.
And, like for example, you know, in the town of Banff, we get these pressures sometimes that we should just put up barricades at the edge of town. That kind of idea. We're a busy day, let's just put up a barricade and
Mhm.
and kind of send people back to the highway.
Mhm.
Well, the challenge with that is there's a lot of logistics that go behind that kind of thing, which is kind of hard to really get your head wrapped around. But one of the things that I have really been pushing for a long time, and this goes back to your very first question about what would I like to do, hopefully in another term,
Mhm.
is we really need to have a community-wide extensive conversation
Mhm.
around what are our desired outcomes or what do we trying to achieve as it relates to visitation in the town of Banff.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is, I'll give you a very specific example. Does the town of Banff have a person problem, or does the town of Banff have a vehicle problem?
Right.
Right? Let's have that conversation as a community.
Yep.
Let's have that conversation, because once we as a community decide, is it a vehicle problem or a person problem, that's when you start getting into, okay, well, how are we going to address that?
Right.
Right. And what are the tactics going to be to address that? Because those are the kind of questions that we haven't really had as a community. Like, we've kind of gone around the edges of it, but
Yep.
it's really high time that we have a really important conversation where everyone feels heard. And if there's one lesson I kind of learned from the pedestrian zone referendum piece,
Mhm.
was we had it was very tactical in nature.
How so?
Closing a road for pedestrians is not a strategy, it is a tactic.
Hmm.
Maybe the strategy is to make the town more pedestrian friendly,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, it is still a tactic. And so through that conversation, through that process, I had a lot of conversations with people in the community about, we need to get people out of their cars first before they come into town. Well, all of a sudden now you're getting into a bigger picture,
Yep.
right? So let's have that bigger picture discussion about what we want things to look like. And then we can get into the specific tactics to support that vision, right? This is strategic planning 101.
Yep.
You can't start talking about what you're going to, what you're going to do until you figure out what you're trying to solve,
Yeah. Like, what's the
right?
problem before we figure out the solution? Yeah.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. We got to have we got to pretty clear with what our problem is. And so, that to me is really super important moving forward, because, for me, it's really important to have these strategic conversations.
Yeah.
And more importantly, perhaps, is how all of these pieces fit together. Like, you can't look at parking in isolation. You can't look at transit in isolation. You can't look at, mobility hubs
Oh,
in
it is
isolation.
enmeshed. It is completely
It's
enmeshed.
all interlinked,
Yeah.
right? And that to me is the conversation that we need to have. There's no doubt about it. But in addition to that, though, I think something that is going to be really important for me in the next term is,
Hmm.
we are still a tourism driven economy. Like, this is the reason
100%.
our town exists.
Yeah.
It's
The
the
only
only reason our town exists.
yeah.
And so it's going to be really important for me also to really have a big conversation about our visitor experience.
Hmm.
Are our visitors still having a really good experience when they come here?
Right.
And that's something that we're going to have to focus on, because that's a really big part of it.
Hmm.
And then, of course, the last one is quality of life for our residents. And that's something that I think all of these components kind of fit into the much bigger picture.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, like I think one of the interesting things, Grant, like even just within this conversation, is that like sometimes I'll talk to people and they're thinking about running, and I think back on when I first ran for council, and like it was really like these are my operational issues that I care about. We need to change this red light, or we need to tweak this intersection, or we need to like and we got to fix more potholes. And yeah, that stuff's all great and well, but like the sort of things we've been talking about today are like bigger. They're bigger issues. They're the grand things. We're actually like seeing the forest, not just the trees. And so I think that's really fascinating and amazing and heartening that, this is the sort of stuff that is compelling you to run again. So we got a couple more minutes left. Let's just like speak about like, while we're on the realm of tactics, how's campaigning coming along for you? Because this is not a pleasant part for me.
Well, I'll be honest, Jeff. I'm not a natural campaigner. I really enjoy conversation.
Yep.
I really enjoy having conversations like this one, right? And
Yeah.
and one of the things is, I owned a coffee shop in Banff for 7.5 years, I think it was.
Hmm.
And people ask me all the time, do I miss the shop? And
Hmm.
and I do. I miss the part of chatting and talking to people, and just having those conversations over the counter. My
Hmm.
feet are much happier because I'm not
Sure.
standing for 12 hours a day, I have to say.
100%.
you know but it's for me, what I'm really trying to do is is I want to have a conversation as a community about these big picture strategic issues. And that is what's going to be really important for me over the next 4 or 5 weeks,
Hmm.
is how exactly do we have that conversation moving forward. And you know and and I think I can safely say that topic, this idea of bigger picture strategic thinking, particularly around visitor use or human use, I'm getting a lot of support from a lot of diverse different opinions in the
Great.
community.
Hmm.
And that to me really speaks volumes, I think, to how important this topic is. And I'm going to keep pushing for it. And, over tourism, overcrowding is not an easy topic. And there's a lot of
Sure.
passions around it.
Mhm.
But what I really hope we can do is have a very constructive and positive conversation as a community as a whole as to how to address them.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, for myself, like kind of just tying back towards like campaign side of things, tomorrow is like last day of nominations. We'll see who else comes in and yeah, like we're kind of hitting the ground running here. This is just kind of update like the folks at home. We've got like forums already like starting up like next Sunday and we have like meet and greets and we all lot of stuff. I've already been doing the sort of thing where, the signs are probably going to be coming out soon. Are you guys allowed signs in Banff?
We are, yeah, but it's really interesting.
Okay.
We don't really not, that's not we don't typically do it. Like
Yeah.
there are signs, but they're not nearly as prevalent as they are in pretty much every other community. And
Yeah.
I've asked people a lot why, and I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's I actually I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
not really entirely sure why it doesn't happen. But if I can ask you then, Jeff, so I've really enjoyed my time with you on the Bow Valley Waste Commission, which we served
Yeah, yeah,
together, and I'm just kind of curious then, what made you decide to run for a second term?
well, the biggest thing for me, well, the first term I think like as a rookie, it's like heads up hockey. You're just like, holy cow, what's going on? And so learning all the processes and like learning all the layers of how it works, just just understanding the constituent pieces. Like I've told people before, like, hey, like when you like become an elected official for your community, whatever that is, it's like getting a PhD in like where you live. So I feel like these last 4 years, I've kind of gotten my PhD in Canmore, like warts and all, like all the amazing things, all the crazy things, all the complexities. And it's just such a sophisticated puzzle. So part of me feels that by actually having that 4 years under my belt and having a deeper understanding of all the things, I can be that much more effective for a second term. The other piece too is like, 4 years sometimes seems like a really long time, and sometimes it seems like a really quick time. I feel we've made some pretty big moves on our council here in Canmore with regards to housing. Some challenging policy stuff, and buildings are starting to hit the ground, and I kind of get excited about the idea. Well, hey, we're going in the right direction, but let's just keep pushing a little bit. Let's keep that momentum and see things through to the next level. So I think that's part of it too, like a sense of completion. And by
So
then, like I might have you putting down my tools after another term. Yeah,
it does it is it's very rewarding, but it also has its challenges on a host of levels as well. But so let me have one other question for you then.
sure.
So as an incumbent councillor
Yep.
who ran and was successful and now going to try to run again,
Mhm.
maybe this is a better question to be asked as we get closer to election day. But
Sure.
I'm kind of curious to know your perspective of what it was like running for a first time and now running as an incumbent.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing because this is my first time running as an incumbent. I think the first time when I got back in 2021, um, it was an interesting sort of piece because like I think I was lucky in that kind of like yourself, I was a small business owner. Like I'm in front of a lot of people teaching yoga, so you kind of known within the community, and by virtue of having kids and being involved in like sports and family and all that, you kind of have that community presence. But at the same time, it's also yeah, I had to be kind of tactical. I remember thinking at that time, like how many counselors were going to be running. There's a couple of counselors that were leaving, so there's some more vacancies. It just seemed like, this is like an opportune time to make a go of it. And also at that same time too, I felt I built up quite a bit of social capital because at that time I was really like, working on issues, bringing forth information. This with regards to like Three Sisters at the time. And so it was just like, it seemed like the time to do it. And the other thing too was just like with all those pieces, there's a lot of momentum. And the other thing too is like I had like a really low play like my business was not doing that great because of the middle of the pandemic. And so I was like, well, why don't I do
Yeah.
something that's meaningful? I have two low paying full-time jobs. So
Welcome to the Bow
I'm
Valley.
being a little bit, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kidding. We're good. Things
No,
are
I know
here we
exactly.
go.
But so how then has that changed for running as an incumbent now? because
Sure.
you obviously, to your point, you've learned a lot. Like you
Totally.
had 4 years of learning how this works, and I'm quite sure a lot of your opinions that you had 4 years ago are probably crystallized in some ways. But I'm
Yeah.
just kind of curious to see how your world is a bit different, running as an incumbent now.
So this will probably be the last thing we have on the podcast today because we're almost out of time.
Okay.
Think the things that are different for me as an incumbent is that there is often an advantage to an incumbent being in if you've done a good job, and I feel I've done a good job. So that part, I feel kind of happy about that. Okay, like I've got momentum and I've done good work, and so there's a little bit less of an intensity on campaigning. But at the same time, like I want to do a good job with it as well
Yeah.
too. I don't want to be complacent and phone in a campaign because I don't think that's a good look. And people of our community they deserve like I think all our candidates to drive forth their best campaign. So I am like cautiously optimistic. But at the same time, I'm also gonna like give her. And so, like
Yeah.
all the pieces, put out the signs, go to the forums, like I got
Yeah.
stickers, like all that sort of stuff. And I'll be at the market. So that's the piece. So
No, that's great. No, good for you, Jeff. I really hope you hope things are successful, and obviously, I hope for both of us we're successful.
yeah.
But I
Grant,
really have
I've got
enjoyed my time with you.
I've got my fingers crossed, and I'm really wishing you all the best on your campaign. And I hope that I get back in so you and I can continue to collaborate and keep tackling some of the big issues that are regional for the amazing Bow Valley. Okay,
I
be well.
appreciate that. Thank you, Jeff.
Take care.
Take care now.